I'm just now finally fulfilling because we've had to make cards and the Kickstarter. I had a classic example of a Kickstarter that funded to the extent that it went over my head. It was so that it created so much work that to do it both well and to do everything that we said we were going to do took longer than anticipated. But I've been very generously supported by those backers, and it's been a wonderful process working with the artists and the alpha readers and the play testers, and we got to play at a variety of conventions. It's been going really, really well. But we're now very, very close. But I'm shy to say particular weeks of months because I've always been wrong. But it is soon, and in the meantime, of course, what we have is great things like Eternal Lies, which Jeff Tidball and I wrote for Pelgrane, which is a giant Trail of Cthulhu campaign set in the 1930s with kind of spoilery elements, so I won't say a whole lot about it, but I encourage you both to go ahead and spoil it for yourselves and then consider if you want to play it in parts. It's got a great kind of atomic structure where the first act you can do certain adventures in certain orders instead of random orders, and then the second act really opens up, you can do all kinds of stuff in certain orders, and then it all feeds into a giant third act conclusion that builds off not just what you did, but the order in which you did it. So it's got kind of a fun structure, and which of course wouldn't have been possible without Trail of Cthulhu itself, which is just a really well designed and structured game. And the Gumshoe system is terrific for plugging characters into game worlds in really dramatic and informative ways, because it makes it automatic for the characters to glean information out of the game world. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we describe and what we sometimes dreadedly call exposition in movies or some stuff, right? But how that information moves from players to the world and then from world to players, which is to say how we describe stuff, whether we're GMs, whether we're players, whether we're new GMs or established players, or whatever we're comfortable with. But I also, I was on staff at White Wolf for many years. I was the Vampire the Requiem developer for a few years. I worked at Atlas Games. I was a freelancer for like Fantasy Flight and stuff. So my examples may wander into books. There are things that I play tested or books and things that I just admire as a fan or what have you. So if I name drop something, it is usually out of the fact either that I admire it and think everybody should have a copy of it. In the case of something like Day After Ragnarok, which these are canons, I should say those two. I did Odyssey and the Bones here is from our imprint Game Playwright Press, and that's a book about games and dice and how dice make us crazy, full of essays from people like Will Wheaton and Chuck Wendig, John Cavallo, Ken Hite, Fred Hicks, Ray Fox. So my goal is essentially to write one of everything, and so the benefit is that I've had the ability to work on a variety of different projects that feed back into the way I examine and think about gaming. But the thing is that gaming is still my hobby, so anytime I try to learn another way of storytelling, I come back and I go, but I'm gonna play it. And so we built this process by which I'm going to touch on a lot of metaphors. And any time that I get so like abstract that I've lost you, somebody just throw an apple core or something at me, because I will go down my own rabbit hole, and I apologize for that. How many of you are GMs? How many of you think of yourselves as game masters already? How many of you have played role-playing games as a GM, whether you think of yourself as one or not, that you have GM'd a session? How many of you have never GM'd? Anybody has only played an RPG or has never GM'd at all? Okay, awesome, great. So the first, and this is very important, the first task is you are all GMs now. There, it's done. We have done it. You are ordained, you are GMs. I'm an ordained minister, I'm allowed to do that, I think. Well, probably not in the state of Florida, because I'm ordained in Illinois, whatever. So now that you're all GMs, we can talk shop about not only how to GM, but how to GM better. And the number one way to do that, in my experience, is to remember that it is a skill like any other craft or artistic pastime, which is to say you're going to get better at it, just to say you're going to have days that are good and days that you're not going to do as well as you think you could do, and that you're going to get better at it by conversations like the one we're going to be able to happen here, where we're going to learn not just, it's not like my way of GMing is the right way, and it's not like it's the way that everybody's going to have to do it. I absolutely don't believe that there is a way of GMing that is going to fit all audiences or all tables. But I do believe that every table is a combination of collaborators and audience, and that's one of the unique defining features of RPGs as a medium, is that we are simultaneously collaborating, but we are also simultaneously being the audience for our collaboration. So we have nobody to prove anything to except for people at our table. And so, and even then, we should be not necessarily proving, like in the sense of showing off or having to necessarily reach the bars that are established for each other as like dares. But we should be helpfully helping people up ladders, and otherwise using the word helpful too much in a sentence. So the kind of advice we're going to be able to get, I think, from any of us that have GM'd or any of us that want to GM, and from the questions we're going to be able to get, not just here during this little mini talk at the beginning, but when Ken and I are here doing our Q&A, is going to be super valuable, in part because I know for me at least, knowing that other GMs do well the stuff that I don't do well makes me happy, because it means that great, that means I can find out how to do that. And if I find out that GMs are having trouble with the same stuff that I have trouble with, I go, great, it means I'm not alone. It means that it's not just me that's having that problem. So we'll find lots of different solutions and ways, I think, to establish how to GM and how to GM not just well, but to reach the goals that we want to reach as GMs in terms of whether it's about, I want to run great combats, I want to run great mysteries, I want to have my characters feel like they come alive, I want to have them be really compelling and lure players into the world so that everybody's interacting more and everybody's having a great time. So in part, as a means of doing the description, which is what I wanted to talk about today in a big part, was not just the description that the GM does, but the fact that everybody's describing the game all the time, because we're talking about a world that only exists in the space between us, in the points where our imaginations connect. So if, for example, there's a great metaphor or example used by Stephen King in his book on writing, which is, if I describe to you a white rabbit in a cage with the number 6 on its back in red, we have a certain amount of information now that we share. There's a rabbit that exists where before there was no rabbit. There is a cage that exists where before there was no rabbit. There is a number 6 on its back, and we don't necessarily know why yet. What does the cage look like? Anybody? What kind of cage did you picture? If I just say a rabbit in a cage, is it a glass tank? Is it a bird cage? Is it a wire mesh cage?
Wired Night of the Lupus.
Right. Okay, awesome. Right. And again, now think of all the stuff that just by being able to make that kind of reference, there's a lot of assumptions that we bring in, or presumptions really, because they're informed, that we bring in about what that cage is for, or what might happen to the rabbit, what the rabbit might do next, what the number 6 might mean. But you're alluding to a lot of new information. But the fact is that in fiction, for example, if I just say there's a rabbit in a cage, and I later say that it's a glass tank, or that it's a wire mesh cage, or that it's like a bird cage, it's ornate and it's brass, and I didn't say that at the beginning, that's not a big deal, because the story doesn't depend on you to agree with the writer at the beginning for the cage to manifest. Right? You might have to revise your cage, but that doesn't kill the story. It's not death to the reading process. When we're collaborating with other gamers at the table, it comes up because if somebody says, I'm going to shatter the cage, you're going to shatter a brass cage? How does that work? Oh, I thought it was glass, because we didn't yet have that agreement. We didn't yet have that consistency between our visions. And so one of the first things that I want to get across that has worked for me really well is the notion that despite the fact that we often borrow from things like movies and television in gaming, which is great, there's lots of great stuff to take from how we learn that process, we don't get establishing shots in gaming. Right? We don't have one shot that says, look, this is what the building looks like. This is the room in which we'll be playing. We don't get that opportunity to take one vision and then everybody just say, great, I'm going to walk over to the player piano and hit the following keys, or I'm going to go to the pool cues and fight the demon dog, or whatever it is. We have to do a lot of things on assumption, we have to do a lot of things on presumption, and we have to agree to build up over time what the description is going to be. So if you will, description is about accrual. It's not that the room suddenly exists the moment that I say you're in a parlor with a pool table and a player piano. I may not mention the player piano at the beginning because I didn't think it was there. But if a player says, hey, is there a player piano? Since it's like it's kind of a steampunky or Old West kind of thing, I'd love if there was a player piano. Well, we can, have a player piano appear from nowhere. And it's been there the whole time. And we can retroactively edit our vision to say, oh, sure, the player piano, that makes sense. I'll go over to the player piano, and I'll make a persuasion check while singing a song to the room through the player piano. And that ability not only to agree and then re-agree and then disagree and re-agree, revise a room, revise a setting, is super valuable, and it's one of the things that's only kind of manifests super productively in gaming, in live play. Because we can do that when we're making a movie or making a novel or doing collaborative storytelling, but it's the final product that reaches the reader. Because we're collaborating in the creation of this thing, that moment-to-moment process by which we do the revision while it's happening becomes essentially part of the text of the game, not just the pretext. It's not pre-production, and it's not something that we fix in the edit later. We're editing and playing and writing all at the same time. And that has to be okay, because otherwise we're just counting on faith that I hope nobody ever asks me what kind of bird cage it is because I didn't think about it. It has to be okay for somebody to say, I'm confused. And for somebody else to say, I want to change, I didn't realize the player piano was that far across the room, can I do something else? And of course, in gaming we have a notion that you don't want to go back 3 turns or whatever, but if you're describing your movements, which is, oh no, there's no way, the player piano is too far away for that, or it's not, it's made out of iron. Oh, it's iron, who would have thought that? I did not know that, but that's kind of cool. So let's see what we can do with an iron piano. I'm going to take cover behind it, obviously. Or I'm going to game throw it at somebody. But the process by which you can say, oh, I didn't realize it was that far, because we don't always have a map, we don't always have a photo. That give and take extends into all manner of different things that we can do in terms of description, understanding that things accrue over time, and we can edit in a way that we can't do while we're in the audience mode of a film or a novel or whatever, is that we can say, I would like a lot better, I didn't realize, what if this guy's got a Scottish accent? We're like, oh, okay, this is the 3rd session this NPC's been in. But we'll just say he's had a Scottish accent. Because we established he's from Edinburgh, we didn't establish that at the beginning or whatever. And then we said, oh, so sure, yeah, I'm not going to do the accent because I do a terrible Scottish accent. But now we all know that this whole time he's had a Scottish accent. And this takes advantage of the unique processing power that we have as humans, which is not only the ability to revise in pattern and the ability to hold multiple ideas at once, but it takes advantage of the fact that we can do that and celluloid can't. We can do that and the hard drives can't in the same way. So we have the unique ability to play in the medium that we're actually playing in, which is our heads. So for example, if I say, who here has, I need somebody to use the card that they've got as an example so I know what kind of character I'm talking about. What do you got?
The owls.
The owls?
Yeah.
We go with the owls. I think there's only one out of the 102 cards. The owls are the Queen's secret informants and spies. They are the Walsinghams to her Queen Elizabeth, if you will. And so they often seem to be in other houses. And then, so the owls are one of the only things, for example, that you could be in one house and also in the owls. Usually you're only in one house at a time. But so some owls are out, they're public, and they say, oh yeah, I'm an owl. I'm a big deal. I work for the Queen. But the majority of owls, we assume, because the rumor is that they're everywhere, they're always reporting back to the Queen, but a lot of them don't tell you that, because they don't want you to know that they're reporting back to the Queen and her kingfishers, which are for detectives and police and stuff. But so you're an owl, and you could therefore come from almost any level of society, which is to say your job is determining the fact that you're an owl, not necessarily your birth. So if we assume that we're in kind of a Shakespearean, Elizabethan kind of era, which we are in Dark, in the fantasy setting of Dark, do you want to be like, are you landed gentry? Do you want to be from the streets and kind of promoted? Are you middle of the road, kind of, common class or merchant class, something like that? Or
Definitely merchant class.
Yeah, merchant class. Awesome. How did you come to be an owl? Do you think? Were you recruited? Did you always want to do it? Did you set out to lead a dangerous life? Do you want out? Is this something you want to be doing?
No, I enjoy what I do. I like to gather information and to be rewarded via the power of being an owl for having gathered and being able to do that both subversively and at times, obviously, because everyone now knows I'm an owl.
Right.
They now know that I report.
Right,
So
right. Awesome.
It's kind of that status step.
So the power is enough reward for you. I mean, obviously, it's not like you're turning down the money, right?
No.
Somebody pays you for it. But the power is that's the golden chalice for you in this press. Great, awesome. Do you think, for example, like the worst thing you've ever done to stay being an owl? Have you ever ratted somebody out that you didn't want to rat out? Have you ever turned on somebody?
I have not had to do that yet.
Great. Okay.
No.
Do you know what
But
you're going to do when
I'm
that
not
comes
entirely opposed to it. I haven't decided yet.
Right, right.
But
So you have, so you've thought ahead enough to be like, I know sooner or later it's going to come
it's
up.
going to happen.
Right.
Maybe some of my friends I would, maybe not all of them. I don't know yet.
Right,
Depends
right.
on what the situation is, but it's definitely one of those tipping points that would change.
Cool. And what do you could either imagine like we could cast somebody to play your character in the movie, or you could describe a sense of like a metaphor. Somebody like, oh, my character's essentially totally like a jock but for jousting, or my character's totally like a lanky skinny spy, or I'm totally kind of I go for anonymity but I know how to wear a fake mustache if I need to. Like, where do you think in this kind of spectrum? What is your character like visually? And this actually, it doesn't have to just be visual. It can be a matter of if the first thing that we notice about your character is their voice, or is the fact that they smell like lilac or something.
No, it's more. I would say the eyes, just like that observant, the almost like a cold steel as part of that. As far as actual description, I don't know. But that's like the pervasive feature that people notice.
Is it? And this might be a question that your character either does or doesn't like your answer to, right? Which is that maybe your character does or wishes or doesn't wish this is the way it was for them. But when we catch those eyes, by and large, are people like, oh, I love that he's got that steely glare, or are people like, why are you looking at me like that? Like,
Or
you make people
it's an
uncomfortable.
I think there's more of an understanding of there's something going on here, but I don't know what it is.
Oh, I see. Okay. But so it's more mysterious than it is like comfort.
It's yes, but at the same point, it's also strong.
Gotcha.
So it's one of those strengths, but you don't know what exactly that means.
Right, and so it's not necessarily a strength that you're sharing in the sense of like.
No, but it's just there is the strength.
Awesome.
Just there.
Okay. So there are a couple of great things we learned just in a couple of questions and a little bit of this kind of ability to bounce out ideas. One of the things I do, and I do this especially in games like Dungeons and Dark that rely on information. This is true in any RPG. Is I try never to ask a question as a GM without being able to offer one or two answers that are completely optional. That say, did you want to be like this or like this? And then you can just go, no, I'm doing the third path. I'm going a whole other way. Yeah.
See, I didn't get a card, so I don't really
Oh,
look at
yeah,
it. Are they? Is that written on there, or was
Yeah,
that
it's
all
on one side of
improv?
the card. That's good. Does anybody else get a card?
So if I wasn't sure, like if it says you smell like lilac on the card.
Exactly, right? It's similar. And it's in part because it's designed to get somebody. Pardon me, I'm going to lean over here for a second. Anyone else?
Just as a side note, how many players is this team designed for?
Dark is designed for as few players as one and a GM for solo, and it's more of a stealth game then. And then if you play up to about 4, it gets heistier. I've run it with 5, but I advertise it as being for 1 to 4 players and a GM.
Okay, cool.
But so what part of what we're learning about this character, right, is what the character might or might not do, what they're comfortable with doing, the first impression we get of them, and this is building up over time. In a way that if we might just get an image of this character, we might be able to glean from who they cast, how they're dressed, where we meet them, and that look on their eyes, and that first conversation we have with them. That we would get a lot more information in a movie version of this conversation at once than we would get in actual play or in prose, which might take a page to get across the character's first impression. And that buildup of information is super valuable in the sense that we shouldn't feel like we have to get it all onto the page at once or onto screen at once or into the player's mind at once necessarily. Yeah.
I, for one, as a game master, when I have spare time, I tend to draw out things that are going to happen because I'm an artist also.
Oh, cool.
So, like, I will draw out characters or draw, and so forth. Do you think that might be actually limiting the players in some ways?
It's an area I think of picking your battle, which is to say that you are absolutely limiting a certain amount whenever you nail anything down. Right? We're reducing the options from everything to some. And an illustration is one way of doing that. But what you gain can often outweigh or can be more valuable than what you lose by pinning something down. The question is, for example, sometimes you say, well, this is the character, they look like this. My players have a tendency to go to their cell phones when they make a new character and say, I'm played by this guy in the movie. Right? And I sometimes like it, but I sometimes am like, well, so now we've kind of, it can lead them to not want to dig deeper. But it doesn't actually prevent that. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. But the question is, for example, if you say, I think they look like this, and then over the course of play you realize, well, we've kind of established that the character is changing slowly from what I drew, right? Then that's fine, right? Because how many of us have seen a drawing of, like a drawing of FDR, right, or a photo of FDR, right? We've seen FDR. How many of us know what George Washington looks like, right? Okay. So which of the various illustrations of George Washington that we've seen are accurate? Right? And while that was also very believable, and Ken, I'm sure, can tell us how right or wrong either one of us is, but the fact is that they're all sort of wrong, and they're all right enough that we have a common knowledge of what we've agreed, at least, right, whether it's accurate or not, what Washington looks like. And even if we know that we're wrong, we don't know how wrong, because we can't just go check. And with a fictional character, it's the same thing. There isn't a master version that we're going to bump into later, which we go, oh, it turns out that we're never going to meet Washington and go, oh, we were way off.
I kind of described it to one of my players once when they were trying to, like, I don't want to lock my character down. I'm like,
right.
Think of it as a pilot episode where the characters are kind of there.
Right.
But
we still don't know what the actors are fully capable of yet.
Or even if it's going to be the same actor. I've seen, like, the pilot episode, isn't that Doctor like a totally different person before?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's...
And that's one of the strengths that we have is we're not bound to... Yeah.
To another.
Right. When they recast somebody, or especially with when kids age faster in television than they do in real life.
Or you get a new artist on the comic.
Or you get a new artist in the comic book. We still understand what Ms. Marvel looks like, but now, or what Captain Marvel looks like, but there are still changes, right? But then we arrive at the same person. There's a great book called What We See When We Read. I forget the name of it often now, but there's only one book called that, so you can find it. But that talks about, among other things, is a great example it uses is Anna Karenina. And they say to people who love and have read it like a book group. So we all read Anna Karenina. What does Anna look like? We're like, oh, she moves like this. Okay, that's cool, right? And her hair is her hair she said smells like summery and kind of bright. Okay, cool. But what does she look like? Oh, well, we said that they mentioned she's got kind of like the wider ears, kind of slightly big ears. Okay, does she have a nose? Oh, I didn't think about it. So you've been picturing and loving for this whole book Anna Karenina. But she sort of didn't have a nose for the whole book. But you don't think about it. We don't worry about it, right? Because she had like your grandmother's nose or your aunt's nose. Or the nose changed over the course of the reading. Until we pin stuff down, like say lock it in, we're actually very comfortable as audiences and as readers and as listeners and as audiences and creators with the idea of a person whose face is constantly in motion, constantly changing, until we have to lock it down. And we have the benefit that we can lock it down. We can go, I use this picture, right? We can use the illustration. And then we also have the benefit, because it's not like we put that information on the air and now we're going to get letters when we change actors. We can say, so I changed the eyeglasses a little bit and I added a beard and stuff. And or you can say, hey, so it's been 6 months since we last did this character. I drew them now. They look different, a little different, right? All that stuff is on the table. Yeah.
Or you got someone like Neil Gaiman writing American Gods, and when he describes Shadow, everybody always says, "Are you black? Are you American?" He doesn't give a definitive. Shadow's answer is always, "I don't know what I am."
Right.
And they just cast a light-skinned black guy, which makes sense. I mean, because
but it's also
it's never described exactly what Shadow looks like.
And they've talked about how hard it is to cast that character too, because again, casting locks a character down in a way that you're like, that's kind of the whole point of Shadow, right? Is that you don't know Shadow can't lock them down.
Yeah.
But exactly, you have that room in part because of the genre, in part because of fantasy, in part because of the medium, to be nebulous where we want to be nebulous. It wasn't necessary to write about what Anna Karenina's nose looked like, and we weren't confused until we stopped to be confused about it. We don't know what your character's cheekbones are like, your character's ears look like, your character's facial hair looks like, if they have facial hair. And it doesn't matter at this stage. We have enough to start the scene. We have enough to learn about that character. We have a vibe. And so often that vibe is more important. And this is true both for characters and this is true for when you're describing the world. That the establishing shot when going into like a setting or a scene in a game environment is often can be done in 1 or 2 sentences of a metaphor. Imagine if you have a character walks into a room and they say, one character says it's freezing in here, says an NPC, and we go, okay, so now we know that. That's a tangible detail we have. It's one of the 6 senses. If we agree that there are 6 senses, the 5 immediate senses and the general emotional sense of the room, the vibes that we get. And somebody else steps in and says, like, man, when's the last time somebody, like, dusted this room, right? And you go, okay, so now we have an idea too. We don't necessarily know exactly how. It's not like they came in and went, oh God, I won't be in this room. And they didn't come in and be like, oh, nice, right? The first reaction was, when was the last time somebody swept the floor in here? Then we have information that's coming up that isn't necessarily that there's a layer of dust. How much dust? The footprints, right? Where it's about kind of guiding information and letting it, both sometimes pointing it intentionally and sometimes letting it go where the players want to take it. So that you might just say, yeah, the place is, it looks like it's been ransacked. And you say something like that, and I as a player go, it looks like it's been ransacked, or it's just a mess. Like, am I supposed to literally understand it's been ransacked? And that's okay, I think. It's not bad GMing, it's not bad play to stop and clarify that way. Because we get metaphors that we don't know are metaphorical, or we get descriptions that we're like, well, how literal are we being, and how, like, are the paintings off the walls and the furniture's upside down? What are we talking about? And that's accrual. That's digging deeper. That's letting the information build up in a way so that the information, our view and sense of the place 5 minutes in is different than it was 1 minute in. And this isn't a process where you do it at the beginning and then you play the scene. Me especially, I as a GM, every time a player takes a turn, I add in a detail. And it's not necessarily a detail that I had pre-planned, sometimes it is. I have a tendency to make lists of, I do it by senses, so I try to do like 3 sights, 2 sounds, 2 touches, 2 smells, whatever, depending on the space that's going to be used a lot. And otherwise I just try to take advantage of stuff from day to day that I say like, this is nice even light in the room and you can hear the birds outside, so it's not so loud that you can't hear birds outside, but you don't know what kind of birds they are. Somebody might go, oh, I want to go look. What kind of birds are there? Right? And you go, oh, I don't know. You probably know more than I do. What would be it's a regular bird. What kind of bird is it? Or whatever it is. That kind of build-up and that kind of process in which the description never stops and the players are allowed in on it. The players are welcome to say, I want to walk across this room with the hot coals. Well, my boots take it. And I'm like, I assume that you're dressed like with sturdy enough shoes to walk through this because you're out dungeoneering. But does your character just wear sandals or anything? And the player now has an opportunity to do a little bit of metagaming, right, which is to say make the right decision for the moment. But it's not like they're going to change their shoes to sandals later. We've established something. So now they're going to the choice consequence relationship is already built in. So now you can say later, well, you went with boots. And so now the question is, are you going to be swimming across this river and fill your boots with water and be all waterlogged and sloshing around for the rest of the adventure going, oh man, I should never have poured these boots into the river. Or whatever. Or the goblins hear you coming because they continue sloshing through the corridors, whatever it is that's going on. Can create those situations where the accrual has real teeth, even though you're not forming the question, are you wearing boots, as a succeed-fail situation, or as a gotcha, right? You never want to be able to, you don't want to have to be doing that. But is that you're saying, I don't know, that's a good question. What do you think? Your character lives in this world all the time. We don't. Your character is a professional dungeoneer. We are not. So what kind of shoes does a professional dungeoneer wear? And we might sometimes just say, I don't know, are you wearing the smartest possible boots, or is your character wearing something for appearances, right? Exactly, right?
Rocks. Right.
Oh, I always wear flies in the
Yeah,
time.
Uggs. Yeah, Uggs.
Oh,
I
yeah.
like boots.
So, yeah,
Light on
so
it.
you're a barbarian. You got the fur boots.
Light on
But these sort of things, as they build up, allow us to do something that's very important, not only for the world, but for the characters. Let me give you one of these cards. They're all the same on the back, different on the front. Yeah, just one that I just think. And that is your position on the tree of the city. And we'll get to that a little bit more as we go on, but I just want you to lose out on a card. One of the reasons we do that is so that not only do things accrue, but they accrue as they change. So people both feel alive or living, and the world feels living when it's not the same every time we go there. It might be within a certain amount of parameters, right? Oh yeah, this place. You walk into somebody's apartment, and you go, oh, you rearranged the place, right? I like it, it's nice, right? Or they come in and they go, what the hell happened here? Or they walk in and they don't notice, and you're like, how could you not notice? We moved everything around, right? We're still within the parameters of sort of that person's place. It's not like they necessarily come in and they're like, when did this become an extra dimensional space, and why are there trees everywhere, right? I mean, we can make these massive swings and differences in an RPG because we have no effects budget. We can just render anything we want to because we have the beautiful processing power of our gorgeous and formidable and archaic and chaotic minds. But deciding how those changes are going to manifest and how fast they're going to manifest is a process that you don't decide during prep, and you don't decide after play. You don't decide, but you decide constantly, and then you redecide, and then you redecide, and then you redecide based on the choices the players are making. So, for example, how many of us, Ken and Robin, have talked a lot about, both on the show and in various areas, the idea of iconic versus dramatic characters. Do we know what the differences are between this kind of jargon that is sort of in-house with them, but I tend to agree with the notion, yeah.
A dramatic character changes, an iconic character makes the world change to them.
Right.
Like the teacher that goes into a school and fixes the school by being true to what the teacher was at the beginning.
Right. And of course, I'm a big believer that the two of them are essentially, those are parts on a spectrum, which is you can have characters in which you are simultaneously iconic and dramatic, in which you both change the world and yourself. Right? You can land partway halfway between the poles, and then often it can change story by story. We see Sherlock Holmes is largely an iconic character in that Sherlock changes the world through his Sherlockness to make the world more like Sherlock wants it, or more to reveal how it really is, even though we were hoping it would be different. But different incarnations of Sherlock can be more iconic or dramatic on those arcs, on that spectrum, and still be Sherlock. So the notion is, if we make a character that cannot change, a character in which you say, my character would never do that, then you say, and you get a certain number of those I think for free, but you want to be really careful with that idea. My character would never do that. The feeling I have is, really, what if my character would never turn on their friends? They're never going to say, I'm never going to rat out Doug. I might rat out Edgar, but never Doug, right? And so that's on two things. It's created a situation in which we say, okay, so now we have a scene. We could play a scene or an adventure in which it's about ratting out Edgar, and that will be establishing the character. And we can play a scene in which I say, really, what if Doug turns on you first? What if you think Doug has turned on you, but you can't prove it? What if Doug won't turn on you, but you're sure it's going to get him killed? You can save his life by turning on him. All these various things are, okay, well, what if this? Well, now we have, on one hand, when you say my character would never do that, you're shutting doors. On the other hand, those doors can create opportunities for the GM to knock and say, well, would you answer if I knock like this? Would you answer if I pound on the door? Will you answer if I slide money under the door? Right? And these create situations now, they re-ask the question in dramatic fashion so we can say, interesting, so I've always thought Batman would never kill. But Batman will pull a gun on a dude, it turns out, when I'm playing Batman. And then he will retire because he pulled a gun on a dude or whatever. Because, well, that's it. I've gone too far. Can't do this anymore, if you've seen Batman Beyond. But that's one Batman. There are lots of Batmen in various incarnations of the Batsmen. And so as we encounter the character and experience them over time, they both accrue, but they don't necessarily accrue consistently. It's not about protecting a character to make them exactly like they were in the pilot, or exactly like they were in that first paragraph sketch, or like they were when I rolled up their stats. And we can, for example, see this in D&D, where characters in D&D can absolutely arc and change in ways that are very dramatic. And we have a great sense as to how that might be, because we can see all the choices ahead of them in their character class. If we're to just play a single class character, we can say, eventually, my character's going to have to choose between two different ranger paths. And so I can foreshadow, not necessarily which one I'm going to choose, because I haven't made up my mind yet, but that I'm going to have to choose. Right? So we have certain dramatic beats that we can already see in advance, and the character class is sort of like an iconic arc, in that we know that the character's going to become more and more like a ranger as they level up. this is with not multi-classing, whatever, notwithstanding, right? But as they gain levels, they're going to become more and more like the character that they think of themselves as being or have demonstrated that they are. Other games allow you to diversify or shift or expand, which to say, well, I'm going to gain like 10 XP at the end of this session. I'm going to add points to my character and pick up new skills. And I have no idea what skills it's going to be. And you might pick skills because I think they're going to be valuable next week, or pick skills because I used them this week, and so it feels organic to pick them and show that I've grown and changed with them. I don't think enough RPGs have systems where your characters can change roughly back the way that you can, right? Or which you could say, look, so I put all these points into drive, and the more I think about this character, the more I realize that all the public transportation that they take, and the fact that they live in London, I don't think they have that many points in drive. Can I take them out and move them around? I, as a GM, by and large, would say, yeah, let's just, as long as we're still kind of within the parameters of the character. We understand what's going on. We haven't established all the facts in the sheet on screen or on stage, so we can always kind of do little soft revisions, just like we can do it with the description.
What happened with that game? They just, Tokyo drifted all over the place to get away from a bad guy, and the next time they're like, yeah, I don't want to do that.
Right, and if they find it unsatisfying, that's a great question, because now we have a situation where the role-playing in the game have reached an intersection, and we kind of get to pick which one of those is going to be dominant in the answer. I would tend to say, well, we've established that you were being really badass with that car, so I would say maybe you could take 1 point out and move it around. That would be, we could compromise. But even still, in that case, I'd say, I don't know, I think if you want to do that, we have to show why your character isn't good at it anymore. Do they, like, oh yeah, the foot I used for the clutch, or the hand that I used for the gear shift and stuff has been hurt from the 10 hit points damage I took this game.
Or they
We say, I've never been the same. Or they get in a car accident, and they're just like, I just won't do it anymore. I give it up. These kinds of choices are ways that, because we're always dramatizing, we're always making these sorts of choices that say, what do the numbers mean? Some games are very rock solid about what the numbers mean, and some games, a 2-point difference is an ocean of different possibilities and ideas. Like when a character in D&D gains an ability score point at a level, they just automatically gain an ability score point. What does that look like to everybody else in the world? Do they go, you been working out, Doug? Or do they just say, oh, he's a fighter, he must have gone up in level, right? Or how does that work? Do people notice? And do fighters have to work out to raise their strength score? By and large, we don't care. We often don't worry about it. We don't have to worry about it. We have the option, the luxurious option of saying, in this game it's important, or this one time it's important. We choose what to focus on, and we choose what to say is or is not, if you will, on stage or on screen in the game. What is in the text and what is in the subtext. Let's get a random card here so you can find out where your character lives in the fictional city I might still be talking about. It'll make sense later. But so as an example, right, with things like whether you're changing the stats of your character is how the character changes and how characters change the world. Description is a valuable and it's a vital part, I think, of making it so that if your characters are iconic or your characters are dramatic, either way, the world is likely to change. Right? Dramatic characters might change as a reaction to the world, but it doesn't mean the world stays the same. Their stories might still very well. I learned that I will never steal again, but I didn't give back the diamond that I took to learn that lesson, so the museum is still missing a diamond. In that process of taking and giving, we want to be able to change our descriptions of things that we can say, oh, now in the museum there's this big, great, beautiful room with all these lights pointed at an empty case. It's weird, right? So something has obviously gone wrong in the museum. And that's a very heavy-handed example, but the notion being that if we learn how to describe things through a cruel, that we can do things like change little details in and out so that we can say, yeah, the surface never looked like this. It's oily and tarry and something terrible has happened. Yeah.
When you talk about describing a scene,
yeah.
They did that in Star Trek Next Generation,
Mm-hmm.
where some of the crew were asleep,
Mm-hmm.
and they were taken to some other dimension. They kept describing this room, and the holodeck kept
Right,
envisioning
they're building that room in the holodeck.
the chair.
Right.
They were describing the chair.
Yeah.
Or the table they were laying on.
Yeah. Right, exactly. And that shows a lot of that notion of the overlapping viewpoints and how they arrive at a consensus. Something that is not exactly what we see when we actually follow them into the other world.
I never paid attention to see if the table they finally come up with is the table that actually was in the other dimension. I was going to make a point of that.
I did. I have checked actually for this very reason, and it's very similar. In fact, I think it's almost too similar.
Too
Like the
similar,
holodeck
so.
apparently has file footage of this other dimension,
Yeah.
but it's just different enough to understand that they still were all kind of trying to reach consensus more than totally, because they just say no, a sharper knife, and then he gets a knife that's so much like the alien knife. We're like, does the holodeck and the aliens buy their knives from the same guy? I don't know how that works, but it's it's exactly that same concept, right? Bat left and beyond. Sorry, I apologize. That was a bat left joke.
They do that with some shows. We'll do like a point of view episode where like 3 different characters will will try and relate the same basic story, but
It's like
from a
Rashomon,
point of view.
right?
Rashomon,
Yeah.
point of view, POV from Batman the Animated Series,
Oh, right. Yeah.
and a few others. They a lot of shows have that kind of.
Yeah. Where we see the world differently based on who it is that is the,
Yeah.
the protag in that sequence.
There was one show that did that with 3 different point of views of the same situation. They were wildly different, and it was all in the family.
Oh,
And-
awesome.
With
Yeah.
Archie describing it one way,
Right.
Meathead describing it another, and then the wife comes in and you go, oh, the dingpat point of view. And she was correct.
A book that describes that too is As I Lay Dying.
Oh, yeah, right? Or for that matter, actually, it kind of does it in only 2 ways, but there's an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, where the guy goes off on this massive adventure in his mind about how he's going to escape his death, and we find out that, of course, he has not necessarily succeeded. But his perspective is different from reality, or reality actually lies at the intersection of these different perspectives. Exactly, right? Is that that reveals as much about the characters as it does about the world, even though it is not necessarily wholly accurate to either. We don't know everything we need to know about Meathead from the way he sees this scene, I'm sure, or about Archie. But we know that it is a uniquely Archie perspective on the scene. And we have a certain idea, right? Because we know Archie. I don't know which season this was. I haven't seen every episode of the show. But I imagine it wasn't so early that we don't know Archie very well yet.
The way they brought it about is when you see Archie's version of the show, he's viewing a person of a certain ethnicity who had a big knife. Meathead brings it out, and it's a guy who has like maybe a little penknife, and the wife has one where it looks like a Swiss Army knife.
A Swiss Army knife. Okay, yeah.
And at the end, you find out, oh, he dropped it in the kitchen, and they pick it up, and it's the Swiss Army knife.
It's the Swiss Army knife.
So,
So yeah, we have that verification.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. But exactly, right? This kind of idea of who is the POV character in an RPG, which is something I'm going to dig into in just 1 second. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, how do you arbitrate if you're describing the scene and you have 2 players who maybe they're very into it or they're very like when I say controlling at the table, I don't want to automatically throw negative assumptions.
Sure.
You know, and suddenly they both have 2 very different ideas of a scene or a situation. Like one of them, they view the political person as the evil vizier, the other views them as the Obi-Wan Kenobi. What do you do when they describe something and they both have a different idea and neither of them wants to compromise it?
There are a number of toolkits to me in the bag for this, right? And no one of them solves the problem. The instruments that I would use, for example, I start with questions so that we understand what it is that people are what they're actually seeing, and find out how separate or how similar they are. And then I would do. And questions are great technology, just in general, this sort of thing, right? Where you say, well, so why does your character think that? Also, I distinguish between what the player wants their character to think and what the character thinks anyway. Or what the player wants the character to think, what the character wants the character to think. The character's like, no, I want to find somebody that I can beat up to solve this problem. And you ask the player, so you want to just beat up the vizier? And you're like, well, I don't want to, but I'm playing a fighter, and I thought it would be dramatically interesting. I'm happy to play out a situation where somebody convinces me not to. You go, oh, well, great, but we didn't get that from your character's description of the emotion, right? From the way your character was being played. So having those kind of collaborative conversations can be super important. The other thing I do is timing, which is I either make sure that they try to reach consensus frequently and often, right? In constant bits, I check in, and I say, is that how you saw it? I love the one I love is what do these characters see when you do that? Because it also helps distinguish what's internal and external for the characters. So these sorts of things help the build up so that we don't quite reach that point. But once you've reached that point, there are the 2 big issues for me are timing, which is that I would punt. I would say, let's neither kill him nor free him right now. We have stuff we can play out. So one thing you can do is you say, so we can talk it out rather than having to decide in the next 3 minutes. So like if you're at the end of the session, I'm like, no, the cliffhanger is either we kill him or free him. I'd be like, no, there's lots of ways to tell the story, right? Maybe what it is that it's when you walk up and you say, or you just say, I know exactly what to do. And you make eye contact with them, when you lean down, you say, you do a cliffhanger that leaves the question hanging rather than the answer hanging. Right, that we don't know what the character's going to do, and then you say, "So, can we talk about why this isn't working? About this conflict, who's going to give?" And if you want to, this is the last thing: is there's a player level problem here, which is fine. I mean, these things happen. We're all humans playing with other humans, and we're all collaborating. But which is that somebody's going to have to give, and you can try to solve that just socially, which I think is almost ideal, but is often hardest. In which you say, look, somebody's just got to be able to do this in a way that we want to keep playing, and that's going to be hard unless we can find a way to reach a consensus. The other way you can do it is essentially you can mechanize it by saying, I'll tell you what, so if we let Doug pick what happens to the Vizier, then Edgar will get blunt. It's not mechanical, it's not a game rule sort of thing, but so that what it is that you could give, you're sort of subtly giving the player and their character a reason to change their position a little bit. So you're kind of gliding into a compromise in a way that says, what would it take for your character to make a different decision? And this is exactly where the statement, "my character would never do that," is to me both not helpful and also highly suspect, because when I read a fair amount of true crime, and when I do, one of the things that you learn is that almost nobody in a true crime, in an actual story of terrible things that have been done, wakes up that morning and says, "You know what I'm capable of? You know what I'm in the mood for?" Sometimes it happens, but that's generally not how people work, right? Is that we escalate, and we often escalate against our will. People get mad and they go, I wish I wasn't so mad. Unfortunately, we as people are not often in the position to say, I would like to respond differently to the way my gut reaction is telling me to respond. Like, we can stop and do that, but we also say, and the moment of play, the fact that play is constant and is immediate, I think leads us to do things like make decisions for the character. Well, this is my character's first impulse, so that's got to be what's true to the character. And I'm like, you can do that without committing to it. You can say, my character's first impulse is to let this guy go. Or my character's first impulse is to just leave the room and let somebody else deal with it. And you can say, ask then the player, what is a more interesting decision to you? You're still in charge of that character. And what can we do to help your character reach the point that they make a decision that is best for everybody? Whether it's tactically best or just then it gets the game to go, and then you dramatize it. So you'd say, you know, Edgar would let Doug free him, or would let Doug question him, or would let Doug pay him off, or whatever it is. If Edgar can see the whole thing, and then now I have that information on Doug. Or if you say, as long as we spare his life, or as long as we don't make me violate my alignment, or whatever the game system or game world is like. But finding those sorts of points and finding out the agonizing increments by which we can move the characters into alignment and into agreement. And part of that, again, goes back to the social question, which is how fast can you do that with players that you either don't know really well or do know really well and don't want to, like, put the pinch on, right? Yeah.
Is there a situation where you would sit back and say, okay, your character views this NPC this way, your character views this NPC this way, have at it.
Have at it.
Yeah.
Absolutely, I've done it. The thing to me is that I only do that when the players are already very comfortable with each other. And the players know that the players aren't going to make the other one do, they're not going to put somebody in a position that they're just not going to have fun anymore. Like Fiasco, actually, to me, does that a lot. If you play Fiasco, where you've got there is no GM and it's roving at the table, each scene somebody is kind of the main character of the scene, and everybody else can be playing against them in a way. Well, those scenes have a natural POV sort of built in a way. For example, we did an adventure where I do not recommend doing this, but this is how we did it in this particular campaign. There were fighter pilots in an outer space war against an alien menace, and I went to 3 of the 4 players, and because I had a cool idea about a character who gets shot down and then is left in solitary confinement because the aliens won't question him because they don't want to reveal their intent or themselves or anything, so they're just trying to figure out what to do with him. And while he's in solitary, the other player characters come to him in visions, and he's not sure who's real, who's not. He's not sure who's in the cell next door if he's alone. So the way to do that, I said, was all the other players will know that when their characters blow up in the first dogfight at the beginning of the game, their characters are fine. It's just him that gets shot down. And so everybody else is playing his visions, and they know that, and he doesn't. And this is a very extreme example of, we know, everybody at the table except for my friend Seth knows what is real right now. And that is that Seth has been shot down and is just kind of freaking out until we can come and rescue him. And then they do rescue him, and of course Seth is like, wait, so I don't know, are you here? Are the player characters present to rescue me, or is this another vision? And in hindsight, I think we could have still done that, but I don't think I set it up very well. And so one of the big things that I would say is something like, you see him this way, you see him that way, and it's not an illusion spell, and it's not psychic power or something. It's just about, let's get the players to tell us what they see, and we go, great, so we're going to have to reconcile that. Is to say, one is to be very comfortable with the players, which the players understand each other and what the boundaries are, but is to make it as overt as possible that you are leaning back and saying, can you two settle this? Like, what are we settling as players or as characters? Like, establish the arena and the stakes. But it's also to make sure that everybody's very comfortable with it, and the fact to understand that it's a thing that can be done, which means it can be done well or it can be done badly. And so it's not a question of should you ever or never do it, as much as it's a question of, well, that didn't work. And you go, well, but we all learned it didn't work, and let's and you can again use your powers of live editing and revision at the table to say, hey, so let's back up 1 minute in film and say, let's stop right before the characters are about to pull guns at each other and ruin the campaign forever, and say, what would happen, like, what would it take for the characters to not draw each other and explore that?